Here we are. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning to you all, and welcome once again to our special lecture series. We're very fortunate to have two wonderful speakers on board the ship. Philip, you've met a couple of times. Richard did one talk on the first night. A lot of people were tired from him, so I'm reintroducing him. Would you please welcome our destination speaker, Captain Richard Heyman.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Ray. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Again, it's a great pleasure to be aboard this beautiful ship and get to know some of you. Though after watching Philip's presentation, I think I was terribly underdressed last night. I forgot my pearls. And I would say coming to India is one of the great experiences of travel in life because it's such a diverse and a country of many, many peoples, many, many languages, climates even, but above all has very deep history and very deep spiritual life. And we will encounter that in Mumbai and our ports going south. And it's almost more than one can express except in little bits and pieces, which I'll do my part. I first came to India in 1975 after I got out of college, and I was very interested in Indian music, and through a professor I went on a 3-month tour of all of India. And I actually lived in Mumbai for 3 months at that time, studying music, so I have a particular connection to it. Then I went back later and I studied with Ravi Shankar himself and performed with him as actually a vocal men's chorus, once upon a time. Don't ask me now, though, to do that, but I've had many trips to India ever since and friends, so I feel very sympathetic with this country, which is both ancient, very modern in places, especially in Mumbai, you'll see, and then very conflicted with its own past and very confident of its future now that it is becoming more prosperous, though many people are still left behind. And so you'll see this combination of contradictions as we travel there, however briefly. And today I'm just going to show you a bit about Mumbai here. Of course, this is the gate of India and the subcontinent itself, which is sort of a world to itself because it's surrounded by mountains, the Himalayas, and then on the Burmese side, more mountains. And so it was isolated from most other nations except by sea. And so the route we're on right now is an ancient trading route to go to Arabia. And similarly, travelers going back at least a couple thousand years have traveled all the way Asia and down to Africa. And we are following in the wake of so many people. But right where we're going in the western coast, there is a gentle plain that goes up to what's called the Ghats, or the Western Ghats in this sense. So the center of India has mountain ranges. They're not very high on both the western and the eastern side of the subcontinent. We'll be going down this coast, and these mountains are so far back you don't really see them. But they have a hinterland, which I'm just going to show you a bit of it because it's important in their climate and history, because this is where the monsoon winds come and drop their moisture, making this very rich and fertile land. Above that, though, into the center of the country, it's called the Deccan Plain. It's often very dry, very rugged. And again, compared to Mumbai and other cities on the shore, this is a back country that is still has some of its wilderness with some wildlife. So this is an Ajitad, which is an indigenous kind of a deer. Again, now protected. So much of the wildlife in India has been so decimated, there are only little pockets of reserves. Some of the gray monkeys, but if you know Indian religion, the monkey is considered a holy animal after the god Hanuman. And so you'll see them around the Hindu temples being fed and being cared for. But careful, they can pick your pocket. And then there's the great peacock, which if you go to any large hotel palace, they are on display around the grounds, but they are, let's say, watchdogs, and they will shriek at any intruders who get too close to them. Well, here's just illustration of the monsoon. Now you can see in this illustration you have in the summertime, the southwest monsoon comes up and brings all of the moisture from the Indian Ocean onto the subcontinent. But we could feel that wind off the deck just these days. That's the beginning of the northeast monsoon, which is the cold wind coming off of the Himalaya and the Tibetan Plateau, comes down, crosses the great continent and then the deserts and comes off as a hot wind. You felt how hot it was yesterday, that wind. Well, that's just the turn of the season, and then later in the winter it gets pretty cold, especially North India. So this is what is the typical monsoon rains come in and they wash over all of the area, especially the coast. So this is just rainfall. You can see it's concentrated right there on the coast as monsoon hits the upper hills. There was a record rain in Mumbai a couple of years ago of over a meter in one day. Over 3 feet of rain fell, flooded it out. So we may have a little bit of that. You can see some kids out there dancing in the rain, though this is not the rainy season. In June and July is the height of the southwest monsoon that drenches the coast here. Now, I'm going to just show you some of the oldest things there are. This is Elephanta Island, which dates from the 7th century, and it is at a period of Hindu culture that cut caves and shrines into various mountains. And if you can get on the excursion, it's a journey into the ancient past of Indian culture. Up above in the Ghats, there's the Ellora caves. We don't have time to go there, but this is a typical devotion that was done where you carved out these tremendous living rock statues of the different gods. This one happens to be a Buddha. Here is Shiva, the god of destruction, Vishnu, the preserver, Padmapani, his consort, so there was usually a female god attached to the larger gods. And in Hinduism, there's thousands, minor and major. This is Krishna, and you'll go to the Krishna temple, who is typically playing a flute, and his consort Parvati. And every March, there's a great festival, the Krishna Parvati Festival in Bombay, where they have processions all over the city devoted to this young lovers. This whole part of India had many different empires over many centuries. The Rajatuka Empire at this point came from the Central Plains all the way down to where we are, down to Goa and Cochin. This was a Hindu empire. Where we are in the state of Maharashtra, the leader of this ancient nation was called Shivaji, which is now the name of the airport. But the Maharashtrians are the indigenous kingdom and people of this area. They speak a language called Marathi, which is a Hindic language, but it's only one of 17 official languages in all of India, and there are hundreds of dialects in the various remote places. But one of the main reasons for the unity of India, after you've seen all those Maharajas who used to battle each other, was the Raj, and then the standardization of a Pinyin English so people could actually speak. So people from North India, East, West, South India, they don't speak their local languages. Hindi is the national language, but less than half of the people speak it. They speak their Marathi, their Kerala, or the Punjab, Urdu, there's all kinds of them. But that's where English unified the country. And as Philip brilliantly showed, the Maharajas are a wonder of the past, except they are still around. This is one who was wondering where his pearls got away, perhaps. And I was remembering that on my first residence in India, I went with some friends to go see the Maharaja of Baroda at his palace. And we were received by the guardsmen and such in his vast grounds and his palace. And I was with a professor from the local university who took us in to introduce us. And the Maharaja came up and shook hands. Meanwhile, we turned around and the professor was lying prostrate on the ground with his face on the ground till the Maharaja said, "You can get up now." And so that's the way of old India that continues on. Though they have that particular Maharaja, the son of the one that Philip was showing, became a leading member of the Congress Party and was a MP for his region. So that tradition does go on, but it's in the democratic political system now. Well, before the British Raj, the Mughal Empire was the ruling power of North India. It didn't come all the way down to Kerala and Sri Lanka, but you see that's the flag of this great empire, which had been in commerce and diplomatic relations with the Portuguese and the French and the English, the British. And it was a sort of a height of a certain culture in India because it built some of the most fantastic of the construction. So here's the Gate of Lahore. Now that's up north in Pakistan now. But they had the whole swath of North India and built palaces and fortresses that are still there today. This is Agra Fort near the Taj Mahal. Here's the Red Fort in Delhi, which is beautiful, especially. They have a big sound and light show there nowadays because it's very dramatic when they light it up at night and they recite the history of the Mughal emperors. But they receded over time between the conflicts with the different princes and then the incursions of the Europeans. The Mughal Empire receded, and finally it broke up. So that when the Raj began, there were many of these princely states who were not Muslims, and they were not under the emperors of the Mughal era. The legacy of this, though, is that there are many Muslims still all through, especially North India, even after the partition. And so we will go to visit mosques and see Muslims amidst all the Hindu culture here. If you go to Amritsar, there's the golden temple of the Sikh people, who are a very elegant and distinguished and brilliant people on their own. But again, they are a minority among many other minorities within India. The legacy of this whole time was beautiful paintings. These are the Mughal paintings and miniatures that you can see in museums, depicting hunting scenes and court scenes and different things. But that's a particularly fine painting tradition which goes on to this day. This was one of the Mughal emperors, Akbar, who was a patron of music in particular. And here's a portrait of him with the great musician Tansen, who believed that music was magic and he could cause the weather to change by it. He could put people to sleep or wake them up, and had many miracles associated with him because he studied the raga system of the melodic lines that are particularly tuned to human nature and to the natural world. So, for instance, classical Indian music, there's a raga, a certain modality that's played in the morning that's quite different from the one in the evening, that's different for one for a celebration or for just meditation. So when you're in India, you will hear a little bit of this. It's sort of overwhelmed by pop music these days, but the classical tradition of India is just stupendous in many ways, especially visually, and I understand people are going off to see the Taj Mahal, which was built by the great Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan for his wife who passed away. And this is one of the most beautiful architectural seats in the entire world. We will see this in Bombay Harbor because this was a mosque built in 1431, the Haji Ali Durgah, which is open to the public. You take a ferry boat over to see it. That's one of the few Mughal era mosques that are in Mumbai. Back then, Mumbai was a very small fishing villages, and it developed after the Portuguese came, built this fort, and the British came. And as you already heard, Mumbai was a dowry gift from Catarina Braganza, the Portuguese, who married Charles II in 1660. So this now large city was traded as a gift to the British Crown, and then became the center of the East India Company and the British Raj. Before it moved to Delhi. This was just a commercial port. Here's the British fort that was built 1665. Here's a view of the harbor. Back when Mumbai was a small town, it was actually many different islands. And it became a major trading port, unifying the economic activity of Maharashtra and the west coast of India, though it actually had an unusual boom when the American Civil War cut off cotton supplies to much of the industry of Britain, and they came to India, and Bombay became the major exporter for Indian cotton to the British mills. Well, the East India Company is a story to itself. You heard quite a bit from Philip about it. This was one of the battles of the company's army up in Punjab that established the British rule there. There was also an Anglo-Marathi war right around Bombay that established British control from the local Maharaja. But you note that flag is particularly curious. Do you know, even though that company's been out of business, do you know where that flag is still flying? It's the state flag of Hawaii. That's the last use of it until it changes. Well, anyway, when the British Raj was in full effect, there was direct rule, and then all these princes and maharajas. You've heard already quite a bit about it. But at that time, Bombay was the great gateway to India, particularly after the Suez Canal opened, and then it became a major transshipment port all the way to Asia. So the Gate of India was built in 1660s in a Mughal style to be the port entrance to Bombay or Mumbai, and so it remains. And of course, in 1911, George V came through with Queen Mary to have their great entourage come to Delhi to have this sort of great celebrations that you've seen. So the British impact on India is just so pervasive that it is a testament to the value that it was brought. And so even the former President Singh of India a number of years ago, he formally thanked the United Kingdom for bringing such benefits to India, because otherwise it might still be a nation divided by all of these principalities and internal conflict. But united India is really a result of this reign of the Raj and Queen Victoria. You'll see all over Bombay and other parts of India, there's statues to this. Now, in other parts of the world, especially in Asia, after the colonialism had receded, many of these monuments were torn down. And so only, I think, in India is this period appreciated because, first of all, the architecture still remains. It has not been destroyed. For instance, in Hong Kong, they've torn down all the colonial buildings except for the Legislative Council. And so the colonial era was directly expunged in recent years. But here in India, it is still vibrant. This is the municipal corporation building, the sort of city hall in 1950, when the city was perhaps not as crowded as it is today. But these remain and are built so well that they stand tall. Here's the Rajabai Clock Tower. Looks like a church tower with Big Ben. And here's the Victoria Terminus, VT. Though the recent government of Maharashtra has changed it to a Marathi name. So you'll see both English and the Hindic names on everything, but it's still a magnificent building with lots of decorations from that gloriously ornamented period. And here's the High Court, and then the Prince of Wales Museum. So these are still active buildings and magnificent, perhaps even more so than anything in Delhi, the current capital. Here's the first major public library, the Asiatic Society. And then modern Mumbai is sprouting concrete mushrooms all over the place. So some of these historic buildings are now getting lost in the large skyline. Mumbai was also the first grounds where the Indian National Congress met and began the independence movement, and then did not become the capital, but it was very much in this city that Gandhi lived. Nehru came from the north. They met, and in the political history that was called the Quit India Alliance, and then the Gandhi's resistance in nonviolent ways that finally unraveled the Raj and then gave India its independence in 1947. So here's the national flag you'll see with the wheel of the Dharma at the center, the Buddhist and Hindu symbol of the turn of time and change that comes around. Here's a statue of Queen Victoria on the left here, but that's a martyr statue, Hutama Chok, which is a monument put up recently by the Maharashtra government for the martyrs in internal conflict in the city of Mumbai to try to establish the state of Maharashtra different from the Gujarati state to the north, which had in former centuries ruled this city in particular. So that kind of internal conflict within India is historical and persistent in a way. Worst of all, as you can read, the partition where Nehru and Jamlal Shah could not agree to keep India united. So there was, after 1947, there was a terrible partition where the Muslims moved to Pakistan into West Bengal, and the Hindus moved into what is now India itself. And still their families that are separated, and there was a terrible mini civil war that happened at that time. And of course, to this day, they're disputed boundaries, and Pakistan and India are still nominally at war, do not cooperate much. Then Bangladesh was originally part of Pakistan, but it was a disjointed distance, and so Bangladesh then became its own country, but it is still primarily Islamic. Now these are the states of current India, all of them, the 27 of them, of which Goa is the smallest, just because it was a Portuguese colony till 1961. And then the Indian government has had sort of a nationalist view that all of the other principalities, for instance, Sikkim was taken in, and perhaps Bhutan will be taken in to the larger nation against their will. But for now, India has been called the world's largest democracy, and it certainly is a difficult management of a population that is about 1 billion, 0.2, 0.3. Nobody really knows. There's just so many people, and that's the first shock when you come to India, and Mumbai especially, the vast crowds. And Mumbai has been a center for immigration from all around the country because it is the financial center, and the highest per capita income is generated out of the larger Mumbai district. About 25% of the economy of India in industry and finance is based right here. And so having a democracy in India is perhaps the greatest testament to the power of that idea, because you have all these people, different languages, different areas, different economies, and they are now they have embraced, let's say, the democratic principles to the point where it is a tumultuous electoral process. Currently, President Modi is from the Hindustani Conservative Party, so he has a religious base of Hindus that are very vocal about many things. But if you go out in the back country, you have a vast population that are often very poor and often illiterate, and that's the great challenge of Indian political systems. How do you reach and educate and or get the approval of people that are living in very back country and they have very few services? And so there's a very great dichotomy between these back country and often hard labor versus the sophisticates in the city. Now, that's not unlike many other countries, but in India, it's particularly strong contrast. So you have menial labor and impoverished wages, and then you have the modernizers who are building dams, roads, airplanes, nuclear power plants, and so this contrast is just as much as any country you can imagine. I worked in China many years, and they have the same kind of contrast, except that in India it's even more strong because of the different traditions. Well, here's the state of Maharashtra. It's not a small state. It was originally joined with the state just to the north of it, Gujarat, but now they have their own state because they have their own language, and that's the symbol of the state, Maharashtra, with the incense burner. But Bombay, or Mumbai, was originally 7 islands that were all inhabited by a group of fishermen called the Koli, who were still there fishing on the edges of the giant city. And the name went from Portuguese Bombia to the anglicized Bombay or Good Bay, and then Mumbai is the official name. The Maharashtra government said, we don't want a European name for our great city. And so they named the city after the legendary goddess who saved the islands from a sea monster. Her name is Mumbadevi, and there's a temple to her right in the center of the city, built in 1675 after an earlier one had been destroyed. But this is why it's called Mumbai, kind of difficult for us to pronounce, and many people still just call it Bombay. But either way, this is it. It's a city built on the islands that were formed into a peninsula, and it is particularly concentrated because all of the commerce and transport comes down the peninsula, making it somewhat like a Manhattan. It's just a collision of many people trying to be downtown where the business center is. And it stretches up quite a ways into the suburbs. You can see the green patches are actually forest reserves to get a little natural relief from what is otherwise a very congested city. The population now is officially about 18 million, but it could be 20, 25 million in the whole metropolitan district. Again, many people come from the countryside and around from the rest of India to come and work here, particularly in the financial services and all of the different services that are in the city. So this view just shows you it's really sort of strung along what is mostly landfill and then extended out into different port facilities. We'll be at the Trust Port, which is on the left. And then the center city is just to the north of where we dock. Unfortunately, I understand there's no shuttle, so you have to go on a tour or else take a taxi to get out of the port facility. And then there are many places. It's a very dense city. It's not very walkable because it's very large and it's very crowded. So it's best to have a destination, just take a taxi there to go see it or be on one of the tours, which is, of course, the easiest. Number 3 on that, that's the Mani Bhavan House of Mahatma Gandhi, and very interesting if you know that great history of the man. The number 4 is the Crawford Market. That's the main wholesale market, which is very animated. I'll leave it at that. But where we're going to be, you can see we're on the Arabian Sea side where there are a lot of ferry boats and a lot of action, and look at all these beaches. Now they're very crowded. This is Chapati Beach, and this is not exactly the resort area. It's really full of all of the local people to go out and get a bit of the sea breeze. This is the Marine Drive with the neighborhoods that stretch along it. That's in the mid area. To the south of where we actually dock, this is the old downtown part of Mumbai with the Gate of India and the Taj Hotel. Now, unfortunately, this was the site of that massacre in 2011. So this terrible fact of our times actually assaulted this grand old Victorian hotel. It has a whole new section too, but it's all been restored. I've stayed there a number of times. A beautifully elegant hotel, and you're treated like a Maharaja even if you're only wearing flip-flops. But this is the Crawford Market, which is just north in the city, and it's built by a British architect named Emerson with a beautiful fountain. I don't think it's in the picture, that was designed by the father of Rudyard Kipling. But inside that market, there's a maze of different stalls, some 1,000 of them, from fruits and vegetables and clothing and exotic animals, and so it's worth a visit there, even if it's on a tour or on your own. It is only open at 11 in the morning till 8 at night, though, and closed on Sunday. As you leave the center of the city, though, you have this vast, let's say, shanty towns and constructions that are where the many, many poor have come to live and work in Bombay. And so it makes probably one of the most chaotic transportation systems I've ever seen. Now, there are train lines that run in and out of the suburbs to the city, but a lot of it is just so congested with taxis and trams and crowds that it's a great challenge to navigate your way to go anywhere in town, especially if there's festivals and when the whole city comes to a kind of a gridlock because of religious activities in some of the temples. But you can always go grab one of these, they call Garmini taxis, that are everywhere, and they have a meter, and it's inexpensive to get to places as long as you can communicate where you're going to go. Now, most people speak a little bit of English, but often not much, so it's best to have any place you want to go, to write it down, give it to them, see if they can read it. But a lot of the old neighborhoods in the downtown area are very jumbled with this, let's say, syncretic kind of architecture of English. This sort of looks like a wedding cake for somebody. A lot of them are getting torn down now because there's so much development in the city, so they're building up big blocks of offices and new apartments. So some of it is not as antique as it used to be, but the people are still there. And this is a curious picture because you have obviously an office worker getting his shoes repaired by the cobbler. So there's a great specification of labor all through India and Mumbai in particular. So there are whole streets that are only cobblers and some that are only stitching clothes on the street, or there are scribes that will write letters for those who can't write themselves. And so that's the joy of walking around. It is, let's say, pungent and active and crowded, so you have to be prepared for that. And then there are fancier uptown areas that are all boutiques and shops. So this is an example of some of the new apartments that are popping up in these old neighborhoods. There was one local business family that built a $10 million, 10-story townhouse for themselves somewhere that was now the most expensive housing in all of India, except not far away you start to get terrible conditions and crowded, polluted waters. This is the great Dali Ghat, which is where the washing services are. People come pick up laundry, come and wash it, return it to the house, like the Daliwala tiffin lunch brigades that go deliver lunch to all of the offices and shops. And so this is ancient India still working every day, even though the water doesn't seem clean to clean clothes. Here's a tannery outside of Diwali. This is the most famous